Hey everybody, St. Paul here. Welcome to episode 51 of Music on the Run. Fellow guitar player and bass player. Actually, he's in the Steve Miller Band, and so was I. We got a lot to talk about. Kenny Lee Lewis is next on Music on the Run.
Before we get started here, do me a favor. Wherever you got this podcast, make sure you subscribe, give us a rating, and if you have time and like what you're hearing, make sure you write a review. It really helps us get the word out so we can have a lot more people coming to the party. Hey everybody, I'm St. Paul Peterson. Prince gave me that nickname, and I've been lucky enough to tour with people like the Steve Miller Band, Kenny Loggins, Peter Frampton, Donny Osmond, to name a few. And when I'm not playing music, I love to run. And this is a podcast about how we stay healthy on the road, physically, mentally, and with our families. Welcome to Music on the Run. Hey everybody, St. Paul here. Welcome to episode 51 of Music on the Run. Man, a lot has happened since we last chatted. A lot of music finally is going on. I had the opportunity to go out to California with my brothers. We have a band called the Peterson Brothers. Go figure, you know, kind of a stretch with the name, but we had a great time. We played a club called Vibrato, which is Herb Alpert's club out there. Had a blast. It was packed. In fact, my next guest was in the band with us, and we had a ball. I just did a gig last night with the Minneapolis Funk All-Stars, and that was incredible. It was a private party for the Minneapolis Heart Foundation Institute, and it was unbelievably funky, and it's just so good to be able to play live music in front of human beings again. Anyway, I'm excited about episode 51. Wait till you meet our guest. He's an old friend of mine. But before we do that, I want to make sure we get in our gratitude segment. And I want to do a special shout out to our patrons who financially help us put on this podcast. And if you're curious about what that is, there are 3 different levels, a $2 level, a $5 level, and a $10 level. You get a little skin in the game. You get some cool little things in return, and we'd love to have you part of that. Go to www.patreon.com/Music on the Run podcast. I'll say it again because I think I slurred my words, and I promise I haven't been drinking. www.patreon.com/Music on the Run podcast. And go check out the different levels that we have there. And I want to do a special shout out to our $5 members. John, I don't know your last name, but you've been with us from, I think, just about the beginning. Thank you so much for supporting us. And Gregory Davis. Thank you so much, Gregory. Appreciate everything you do. We could not put on this podcast without you guys. All right, without further ado, my next guest is a writer. He's a bassist. He's a guitar player, a singer, a producer, and an all-around badass. He's been with the Steve Miller Band forever. I'm going to get the exact number of years out of his mouth. Please welcome my guest, Kenny Lee Lewis. Kenny Lee.
How's it going, Paul?
Good. Thanks for taking the time to hang out with us for a little while.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for coming into the man cave here at Miramonte.
Oh, I love that. That's a beautiful room. For those of you who can't see it, he's got a couple of acoustics. Was that a 335 guitar sitting right next to you? What is that?
That's the one that was sitting next to you the other night.
Oh, you played that. Well, Kenny and I did a gig. He was on the Peterson Brother gig the other night at Vibrato in Bel Air, California with the Peterson Bros. That was a ball.
It was killer.
How fun was that?
It was great because, we don't have a whole lot of really great venues in Los Angeles, let alone the entire state. And it's just really nice to have played one of the better ones with you.
That was fun. And you were a little bit of an instigator on that. I think between you and I, we got the gig booked with Hassan over there, who's a great guy and a great musician as well. So thanks for making that happen. And it was just great to hear you play. You and I have done some gigs together.
Yes.
Mostly, I've been like the drummer or something on them. We had what was the name of the band that we were doing for a little while?
I think we were calling it Abracadabra because we were doing a lot of Steve Miller songs, and it was something your brother Billy had cooked up, and we were working with that gentleman Chris, who's no longer with us, who was sort of like our agent, and he booked us on some really nice gigs up there in Minneapolis, and even up in the Ojibwe Reservation and a couple other areas, and we did a lot of Steve Miller songs, but it wasn't like a tribute act, but we just called it Abracadabra for fun. And yes, you were the drummer because your brother was the bass player and I was the guitar player.
Right. And you played with my brother Billy in the Steve Miller Band. Well, he was in it for 25 years. How long have you been in the Steve Miller Band?
Well, I actually started working with Steve over Capitol Records on the Abracadabra album in this time of the year in 1981. So I've been working with him for 40 years. But I didn't join the tour until, probably around February or March of 82. So it's, 81 years working with him. 40 years working with him. Sorry.
Not quite 81 years. Feels like it sometimes, I'm sure.
I'm, 40 years, working with him and 39 on tour with him on and off. Because if you remember, I took a break from 87 to 93 in which you were part of that.
Right. So that's also our connection, and that's how we know each other, because I ended up stepping in to play with my brothers, Billy and Ricky, in the Steve Miller Band from 88 till, was it 93?
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was 92 or 93. Somewhere in there, right?
And then we dovetailed, because as I was coming back, we dovetailed on that Earth Day gig with Paul McCartney at the Hollywood Bowl.
The Hollywood Bowl was my very last gig. Yes.
And we did an unplugged show, and he just wanted me to kind of play acoustic guitar and sing, and I guess he just wanted to see if I could blend or not, because he hadn't worked with me in a while. And so he just kind of put me on that gig along with all you guys, and that's all in video. And I actually have a really cool video from that night, because if you remember, we all got to go on stage and sing with Paul at the end.
Jude.
On Hey Jude. And so I have this clip of Diane and I and Paul and Ringo and everybody else haloed around us, and we're all singing Hey Jude, and I have a video of that CNN shot that night, and I actually have that.
I have to see. I've never seen that. I don't know whether I'm in it or not, but I'd love to have it just to show my kids.
I'm sure you're in the crowd, but the fortunate thing was that Diane and I were just happening to be in the wings, peeking around the corner when he called everyone out, and he saw Diane and I, and he knew Diane because she was, of course, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds in the Sgt. Pepper movie, so they knew each other.
Your wife was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds in what movie?
The Sgt. Pepper's movie with the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton.
Oh, my God. I think you told me this before when I was playing with Peter, and I've forgotten that. That's wild.
Yeah,
so she was right in the background there, so she was in the mix. She's always been in the mix.
Right. So he already knew her. So when he looked over the side of the stage, and I had just met him backstage for the first time, but he remembered my name, and he said, "Oh, Diane and Kenny, could you come on and join me?" And I'm like in shock. I'm sitting there. I was just sitting there watching the show in the wings, and then he turns to the left. He goes, "Oh, and brother Ringo, you too." And so here's Diane and I and Ringo. We're all going to the center of the stage, and they hadn't taken the shot yet. But as soon as we all got lined up, we all started singing is when they took the shot.
Oh, my God. How great to have that.
I know. It was pretty crazy. So that's the night that you and I met, actually. We had a rehearsal, I think, the day before in a hotel room. And then the next day, we just went up there and did the gig.
Right. And you, from that moment on, you've been with him ever since.
Well, except for there was a break he took when he just retired for a while, and that was from 2001 to 2004.
Oh, so what does one do? I mean, everybody thinks that this is so glamorous and that,
right.
You get this great big legacy gig, right?
Right.
Oh, he's set for life. He doesn't have anything to worry about.
No,
what I'm trying to educate these people on is that this is, when they stop working, so does the band. And, we aren't on something called retainer, which is a salary.
Correct.
What did you do during those off years?
Well, when he took the break in 1999, he kind of freaked out. Actually, it was 2000. Sorry. 2000, we did the Millennial. We did the Atlantis down in Bahamas. It was really great. And we were doing some more U.S. touring near the end of the summer, and we had a couple more dates, and we did a gig in Temecula at this new place called the Temecula, whatever it was, Chumash, resort. Actually, no, excuse me, Pechanga, not Temecula. Okay. It was in Temecula. It was called Pechanga, and that was the tribe that had this casino. It was brand new and a little flimsy stage, and we were up there playing, and they couldn't have any of the roadies up there. It was just the band only. That's how small the stage was. And a guy jumped up on stage, and they had hired these little, Native American women to be the security that night.
Oh,
and they were all kind of sitting down in the trough there, they're on their phones talking to their families or whatever. And this guy jumped right over the top of them, off the top of the barrier. And this big dude is now on stage with all of us. Oh. And he's coming after Steve, right? And so I got my guitar and I'm like trying to get in between him and Steve and kind of pushing him away. And I think we were doing True Fine Love, the song. And while it was going on, the guy, I mean, he never got access to Steve because I kept, kind of blocking him. So he jumped back into the crowd. He did the mosh pit dive and he was gone. And Steve, who had already been kind of upset because SFX had bought all the gigs. So this is before Live Nation. And, was increasing the prices of tickets and, the lawn seats were going through the roof and the parking. And they were telling him who was opening acts were going to be. And, Napster was hitting and he wasn't getting any sales. And it was just a really bad time for him. He stops in the middle of the song, right? And he goes to this whole diatribe about how it's getting too rock and roll in here. The sound's too loud. The crowd's getting out of hand. This is really not the way it should go, and I look over at your brother, Billy, and I said, I think you need to get your resume together because I think this is going to be the end.
No.
And Billy kind of looked at me like, nah. And sure enough, we found out the next day we had a Canadian tour that was coming up in a couple of weeks. He canceled that. And we had one more obligation at the House of Blues in Orlando, and that was our last gig. And he just said sayonara. And he took his football and went home. We didn't have a football, so we couldn't have a game. So you say, we were just completely, no retainer. And he just left. He's just like, and he literally said, vaya con Dios at the end of the sound check. Because that was the last time we heard from him, until I get a call in 2004 when I'm working at Guitar Center in artist relations sales in Hollywood. And he goes, hey, I'm going to go on the Jay Leno show. I got a box set and I'm thinking about maybe using some of the old guys. And, we're going to go up there, maybe do Rock Me or stuff. And, I'm just going to promote this box set. And I went like, okay. He goes, can you do the back line, the contracts, the stage plot, the transportation, the charts and make sure that everybody's there. He made me the octopus, so all of a sudden now he wanted to make me Rick Fisher because Rick Fisher, of course, was gone.
Right.
And
the old road manager of the Steve.
And that's what happened. I did that gig. It was a Jay Leno summer show. We were on there with Pamela Anderson and, what's his name? Who was the schlock TV jock? Jerry Springer.
Oh, wow. Good combo platter.
I know. And it was Leno, and it was outside. It was outside in the parking lot. It was like a summer series or something. So I did the back line. I rented it from the Guitar Center. I got everybody what they needed. He wanted to use local people because he had no budget, so we got Gary Malaber back and Gerald Johnson back.
Oh, wow.
But we called Joseph because Joseph had already been trained in all the harmonies and everything. And he just decided that he wanted to kind of bring those folks back and to keep it lean. He didn't even have Norton come, which was interesting.
Norton Buffalo, who was with him forever.
So that's how we got started. So he quit in 2001, or at the end of 2000, I should say. And then from 2001 through 2004, I was working at Guitar Center. I had no choice. I had nowhere to go, and I needed to keep the money flowing. I had young kids and stuff. And like you say, you just got to go to work, and there wasn't anything like that was, in that price range, to be able to replace. So they made me a fast track manager. I was making pretty good money because I had friends there. And, so I was at least paying my bills. So that's what was going on when he called me in 2004.
Wow. So that's just being, that is what it is to be an independent contractor or a sideman. Is that the greatest kids can come in. You could be with them for 30 years or 30 minutes. And then you got to stick and move the minute that thing ends.
Yeah. He just got a humbug. He just didn't want to go to work anymore. And it was like, vaya con Dios, guys. And that was it. It was not, no severance or anything. It was just like done. Wow. And, I mean, I was still doing casuals and a few sessions and stuff, but the session industry was already starting to wane by then. And in fact, it was pretty much long gone by then, because that was 2001. In fact, it was January 2001 when I got hired at Guitar Center.
Well, let's go back to the beginning. Now, you grew up in California in Pasadena, is that right?
Just born there.
Okay.
I actually grew up in Temple City and a little town called La Mirada up until about the time I was 6. Then my dad got a job promotion. He worked for the state up in the capital. And so we moved to Sacramento in 1960. So most of my childhood was up in Northern California, and I was around, the great outdoors. I was around, agriculture, and I was around, eventually, the hippy-dippy Haight-Ashbury phenomena of Northern California, and used to go over to San Francisco all the time, whatnot. And, a lot of backpacking and fishing in Tahoe and, all that stuff. So it was a really nice upbringing. Went to college there, got in the college, band, learned how to read notation and all that. But, and I was in bands and stuff, but I always wanted to be a studio musician. So my yearning was to get back down to LA, because I had some friends in Sacramento who had older brothers that were in the business in LA, and they used to let me come down there in the summer, and they would sort of mentor me. They were called the Perry family.
Okay.
And Tom Perry, one of the brothers, was the engineer on the Silk Degrees album for Boss Skaggs, and also did a bunch of Diana Ross and, Jackson 5 records. And then the other brother, Bill, played with the Righteous Brothers. I think he was doing it before your brother Billy did it.
Isn't that crazy?
He was doing it like in 62, 63. And, but then he went down there, became a studio cat, played on some of John Lennon records. And, he was a bass player and a guitar player like you and I, and like Billy Franzi and everybody else that we know that is an oddball that plays both instruments at the same time, And, he was one of those guys. So he mentored me. And then another guy named Don Perry placed a bunch of my tunes. He was a producer and a song plugger, and did music supervision for movies and things like that. So I had these 3 guys, and then the younger brother was my drummer in my band in high school, and we all kind of went down together. So I had all these 4 guys that were helping me bring me into the LA studio scene, because at that time it was pretty tight. It was already pretty much sewn up. People like Ridenour and Larry Carlton and Robin Ford. I mean, these guys were all doing the dates. Well, Lukather hadn't come on the scene yet, and that was coming a little later. But I'm talking about the last guys that replaced the Wrecking Crew. It was that bunch. Those are the guys that I kind of met. People like Max Bennett and Earl Palmer and those kind of people. And so eventually I did get into that business, but it took a long time, as it does whenever you make a move to go to a new town. And eventually I was able to do that. And it happened when I met Diane, because she had a record deal, and she sort of brought me into the biz, which was really cool.
Explain to my listeners who Diane is. Obviously, she's your wife, but musically, who is she?
Yeah, Diane Steinberg comes from a legacy of musicians from Memphis that were there during the late 40s and early 50s when jazz was sort of morphing into rock and roll and boogie woogie. And her father was a great trumpet player, played with, Cap Calloway and Dizzy Gillespie and Lionel Hampton, all these people.
Wow.
The keyboard player, Finest Newborn Jr., was like Art Tatum's nemesis. Art would never even follow Finest. He was the baddest guy ever to hit the planet. He was in the family and in the band. Diane was in his lap learning how to play Rhapsody in Blue when she was 12. So she comes from a big legacy of musicians, but eventually her mother moved to Detroit, brought the girls up there, and her mom became a very famous DJ, not only in Memphis, but also in Detroit, and, broke all the Motown acts with all that stuff. So she was around music all her life, became a writer and a keyboard player and an entertainer. And when I met her, she needed a bass player because she was doing a trio around town in LA, and she was just getting ready to do her second album. And that's how we met. She hired me as her bass player. We ended up writing songs together, and that's how I got on her record.
What was the LA scene like back in those days? Tell me about the studio scene, the live scene. I'm just curious because I wasn't around at that time, and I hear it was incredibly exhilarating, lots of work, lots of competition. But how did you fit into that whole mix?
I got into the last 4 years of the golden era, which was from 76 to 80. Once 80 hit, that's kind of when MIDI and sampling and synthesizers were hitting real big, and eventually it just sort of dwindled away. But from about 76 to 80, it was really exciting. And it was just right at the tail end of that heyday, before digital. And, They had, live rhythm sections, 6 to 7 people at a time recording. You had to read notation because studio time was really expensive. You had to go in, you had to be able to play all styles. You had to be able to play solos on demand, first take, second take, or you'd overdub it after the session. And then you get a double, because, whenever you do another track, you get another payment, which was kind of nice because we were all in the union. This is when the union was still going on. And, but it was pretty exciting. I mean, we got to do a lot of different types of music all the way across the board. I would say the only thing we didn't do was probably bebop and that kind of thing, but we would do things that sounded like it that people would write, but we wouldn't go in and actually do a legitimate jazz date, but we were doing everything. I mean, when you'd be doing commercials, you'd be playing bluegrass and country and, gospel and, whatever they called for that particular product and that particular session. Whatever contractor or whoever did the charts and whatnot, you'd have to come to the party with a lot of different styles. So that means you had to own a lot of instruments too. So that was kind of a thing. You had to start buying a ton of instruments, and then you have to have cartage, and then you had to have an answering service called Your Girl or something like that, where they knew where you were all the time because we didn't have any beepers yet. There were nothing. All we had was rotary phones. So you'd leave phone numbers of the places you were going to be throughout the day with Your Girl, and then she would call you wherever you were at, and then she'd leave a number. Oh, you got a session at 8 o'clock tonight, or tomorrow morning at 9, you got to be at 8 a.m., blah, 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 blah. And they would organize your sessions for you while that was going on. So it's kind of exciting. And, you'd move from single scale to double scale, and sometimes you get triple scale, but that was mostly for, the guys in Toto and, those guys, those kind of guys,
Right.
But I started out at single scale, was happy to do that, and eventually worked my way up to double scale. And that was kind of near the end when I met Steve in, like I said, in 1981. And that's when I had to make the decision to walk away from my studio career to go on the road with the Joker, which was quite a decision I had to make.
Well, tell me some of the people you worked with in the studio back then, some of the memorable sessions that you had prior to Steve Miller.
Well, of course, the first one was with Diane, because we went in the studio to do her second album, and who did the producers hire? But they hired everybody in Toto.
Wow.
The only person they didn't hire was Lukather, because he was only about 17 or 18 at the time. He wasn't quite in there yet. So we had Jay Graydon in there on guitar rather than him. But it was Jeff Vaccaro, myself. They wanted David Hungate from the band, but Diane put her foot down. She says, no. He co-wrote these songs with me. He wrote the bass lines. They're already written into the charts. He knows them. He wrote them. Let him play the bass. And the producers were all freaked out about it. Oh, we can't let this guy in there. He's an unknown, And she put her foot down. So I have to give it up to my wife, man. She just said, nope, he's going to do it. And I went in there and I cut it, And, I'm in there with Vaccaro, and I'm in there with, William D. Smitty Smith on organ. We had a bunch of great background singers. We had of course we had, David Page was doing all the synthesizers and stuff. And, it was great. I mean, we had Harvey Mason on some of those dates on drums. We had a guy named Michael Pooh Bear on drums. So just in that one record, I met a whole lot of people, man. It was really cool. We had some other guitar players, Ben Benet, and can't remember all of them, but I even got to play a little guitar on that. Like you, they wanted to, save on a little bit on the money, and they go, well, get Kenny to bring a Stratocaster in. Maybe you could put a rhythm part on, and we'll give him single scale, And if you were already on the bass track, you wouldn't get full scale. You would just get a double, which was not as much as having to hire some guy to come in and play and bring out his cartage. Because, cartage was $150, $200 just to have everything delivered, So, but, and another funny part about that session is that we were splitting the day with a band that was coming in the evening. We were doing the morning and afternoon sessions, and at night a band called Fleetwood Mac would come in, and they were recording their Rumors album at the same time that we were doing our album, and we would compare notes and hang out together and eat yogurt and talk shit and whatnot, and, Stevie Nicks was always mad because I'd always eat the good yogurt in the morning before she got there. She'd go, you didn't leave me any of the good stuff. I'd leave her like the coffee flavored yogurt,
Oh, sure. Oh, that's classic.
Vanilla and coffee, and so I'd eat all the berries and the banana stuff. Anyway, but we were good friends, and, we wished them well on their record. We had no idea it was going to do what it was going to do, but we knew it was a good record. And, of course, with Diane, her record would have probably done very well, too, but then she got that movie. And when that happened, she had to put a halt to her career because she was going to open up for George Benson. We were going to go out with him, and Ken Fritz was going to manage her, his manager. And but she couldn't do it because she had to, do this movie. We even had Steve Perry hired to do background vocals for us because he was a buddy of mine that I grew up with in the San Joaquin Valley, and he was broke and he needed to work, and he wasn't getting anything going on in L.A., so he was all looking forward to rehearsing with us and go on the road, and I had to call him before he even did a rehearsal with him and go, dude, she got the movie. I got to let the band go.
Oh, my God. Steve Perry was the lead singer in Journey, for those of you listening. Yeah. And did you know that I wrote one song with Steve Perry? There's a side note here.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's probably 10 years ago. He lived around the corner from the lead singer in my group, The Family, or F Deluxe.
Okay.
Susanna, and we both had the same Beverly Hills hairstylist when I used to have hair. And so, so he ended up introducing us, and he's like, "Oh, I'm a huge fan of The Family." I'm like, "You are?" I said, "I'm a huge fan of Journey. Julie, my wife, is the biggest Journey fan of all time."
Yeah.
So we got together in his little tiny apartment in Studio City.
Yeah.
And sat down and wrote a song. I called Julie on the phone and I said, "Honey, listen to this. This is Steve Perry." And he freaked out. He said, "Who are you calling? Who are you playing that for?" I'm like, it's my wife, dude. He's like, "Don't play that for anyone." I said, "Steve, let me take the track. Let me go work on it at home and I'll come back tomorrow." He's like, "You're not taking the track out of the house." He was very particular. I think he must be still to that day. But, we were talking once he was super famous and had already left Journey, but that's my side note, my Steve Perry story. But he's your old buddy, huh?
That's great. Yeah. Well, we grew up together in the San Joaquin Valley. He had a band called Ice, and they used to come up to Sacramento, and he was the drummer, and he would play drums throughout the night. And then once in a while, they'd let him come out front, and he'd sing some, kind of Sam Cooke sounding song, because he always sounded like Sam Cooke, for crying out loud. But he sounded great. It was like a cross between Rod Stewart and Sam Cooke. That's the only way I could describe it. And some of his members would come up to music store that I was working at the time. I was only 17, and they would come up and hang, and we got to know each other pretty good. And I got in the club because I had a buddy that could sneak me into the club because I was, like I said, 17, and I could sit and watch them. I think they were playing a place called the Gilded Cage or something like that. But they had a great band, and Ice was really cool. And I became friends with the other guy that was, I think he was a keyboard player, but he also played drums when Steve would come out front. And I didn't get to meet Steve really that well. But then when we moved to L.A., I stayed in contact with him. He and I would exchange notes all the time. He was trying to, get together with the Who's manager, and then he joined a band with Tim Bogert, and that was called Pieces, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, tell me about Pieces.
Because I ended up having a band called Pieces, too, which was a separate
that's right,
Pieces,
exactly. That's what I want to hear about. Were you hanging out? Was that up in San Francisco area or Sacramento area?
No, that was L.A., and that was after Diane and I had done her album, and she had already gotten the movie. While she was working on the movie, I needed to go to work, because she wasn't playing anywhere.
Right.
So I joined a band called Five Mighty Pieces, and they were kind of like almost like a lounge act. I mean, they had outfits, and they would do "Who Loves You," by Frankie Valli, Four Seasons. They would come out from the back of the room all singing a cappella, and they'd come up the stage, and, they did this whole show. It was a high-class cover band. So I got in the band, replaced the bass player. I guess they were having trouble with him. And so I did the cover thing with them for about 4 or 5 months, and we really were taking off big. And they were getting kind of tired of the whole outfit cover thing, and they wanted to do original material. So and they had a keyboard player that they were having some problems with. They were going to let him go. So I suggested that they bring in my friend Jeff Lieb, who at that time was named Jeff Lieb. He's now known as Jeff Paris. But he was the one that introduced me to Diane. And he's, like your brother Ricky's, plays like Herbie, sings like Stevie and Donny Hathaway. He's like a really great player. And so I brought him into that band. And then that's when we decided to start writing. And we built a studio in the drummer's house in the garage. And we spent a whole summer writing. And I ended up calling the producers that produced on Diane's record, because that's the only producers I kind of knew. Right. And they came and they loved us, and they got us signed to EMI Liberty, UA Liberty at that time, before EMI bought them. And we got a deal. Mark Lindsay, the lead singer for Paul Revere and the Raiders, was an AR guy there, and he signed us. And I was always a big fan of it because, he was doing Hullabaloo and stuff, and he had the ponytail and everything. And I was like, wow, man, that's so cool. I want to grow up and have a ponytail someday,
That's unbelievable.
So he was the one that signed it. So that was that Pieces record, and that came out about 78, 79. We got a publishing deal. But the label, unfortunately, UA Liberty, was bought by EMI right before our record was going to be released. And the new guy that took over, they fired Mark Lindsay, and the new guy that took over was a guy named Don Grierson. He was from Australia, and he didn't even know anything about American blue-eyed soul or any of that stuff. And so he says, well, he goes, I don't know what to do with you. You know, we had nothing to do with this record, and I don't know how to market it. You know, you guys are doing all that Michael McDonald, you know, like Bobby Caldwell thing, and that's all dead now. The knack is the thing. You know, you have to do rock and roll and wear eye makeup and wear small tie. And I was like going,
yeah, that was me, by the way. I wore this makeup and
yeah.
Talking about me.
Well, I mean, you know, that's what was coming, you know, and we were just a bunch of American guys. We were like, you know, Pablo Cruz meets Hall & Oates or something, you know, because we were R&B. And they didn't know how to market us because at that time, everything was segregating again. If you were white, you had to do new wave. If you were black, you did R&B and dance and disco crossover kind of stuff. And it was really a bad time in my life because, you know, I was really looking forward to getting out of the studio scene and wanting to become more of a writer-artist. But as it was, we weren't able to do that. So,
right after that period, is this where you started placing songs with different people?
Yeah, I was already placing stuff with movies and, you know, television shows and commercials and whatnot. And then I got one of the guys down. Well, when Diane got the movie, I did another part of my career that I didn't tell you about before I got into Pieces. I went down to the ghetto, and I got a gig at a Chitlin Circuit Club with a black band playing bass, and that was really a great education. And so it was similar to probably your Minneapolis upbringing. You know, I was able to get into the world of R&B on the ground floor level, to the point where I even had James Jamerson Sr. coming down to hear me playing, and he would sit in front of me and give me pointers and pat me on the back all night long, you know, and like tell me, they do sound great. Don't go above the fifth fret. You're using the right bass and it sounds great. Don't use more than 50 watts. You want the distortion. You want this compression, you know, blah, 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 blah. Really? You know, it's like you would give me all these pointers. It was really great education. That's what I was doing, but when I got into Pieces. So, and that was only paying like $35 a night.
Hey, that's the same that they're paying now. So, hey.
I know.
Pay hasn't increased very much at all, has it?
So that's what I was doing prior. Then I did the Pieces thing, and then that fell apart because we weren't, you know, we were doing guitar-orientated rock.
Kenny, how many acts do you think have fallen apart because a new A&R person or new head of a label has come in? We're going to take a little break from the interview right now because I want to tell you about a couple of really cool things. First of all, we're having so much fun with our weekly 1-minute funk jams called Funk Friday. We've had so many world-class musicians on Funk Friday, including members of the Steve Miller Band, Fleetwood Mac, Daryl Hall and John Oates, Earth, Wind & Fire, just to name a few. You can check that out on all of our social media, but you can also see it on our YouTube channel. I also want to take this opportunity to thank all of our members who have supported us on Patreon. Don't know what Patreon is? Go to www.patreon.com/Music on the Run podcast, and there you'll get all sorts of information on how you can financially help us produce this podcast. There are all kinds of incentives listed there on the website, and there are many different levels on how you can become involved. We could not put on this podcast without our patrons. All right, let's get back to the interview. Kenny, how many acts do you think have fallen apart because a new A&R person or new head of a label has come in?
It even happened with Diane's record that I did with her. She was on ABC Dunhill, and when her record was just getting ready to come out, MCA bought that, and the guy that signed her, Otis Smith, he was out. So now she was an orphan. You know, they didn't know what to do with her. So It was kind of actually a pretty good thing that she got the movie, because I don't know if they would ever properly have promoted her. But she did do Jerry Lewis Telethon, which we just got a copy of last month. We've never seen a copy of it. She did the Jerry Lewis Telethon, sang Baby I'm Yours as a cover on her record. And she did like a real cool little R&B, you know, kind of like almost like a, loving you, kind of a, you know,
Minnie Riperton kind of thing?
Yeah, kind of a Minnie Riperton approach, you know, real light R&B. And it just, got a lot of other projects, but it never took off. But it was good because the label probably would have never been able to figure out how to promote that either. So she did the movie instead, which was a flop, but fortunately she had 3 songs on the album and had Favorite Nation's royalty agreement from her contract that she would get paid the same as the Bee Gees and Peter Frampton in terms of her songs on the soundtrack album, which went triple platinum because we've got to get you in your life, Come Together, Aerosmith, Get Back with Billy Preston. So the record did well, and she made some good money off the soundtrack.
Sure.
You know, because the movie just kind of went, you know, but now it's like a cult favorite and people love it. I don't know why, but, you know, it's pretty funny. So that's what happened. And so then I get in this band. The reason why I told the Chitlin Circus story, because one of the producers I met down there that I used to do demos with, an R&B guy, he decided he wanted to do some recording up in the valley, which is unusual for, you know, cats down the hood because, you know, they usually don't go over the top of the hill. So he wanted to go over the top of the hill and do something different with some different people. So he went to a studio called Fidelity Recorders. Fidelity was owned by Artie Ripp, who was the guy that ripped off Billy Joel for all of his money and when there was a New York guy coming up, you know. And it was all New York guys in the studio. They even had April Blackwood office in the back, a bunch of publishers. So they were doing demos all the time. So anyway, the engineer, Joel Seufer, he liked my bass playing on this guy Jimmy Jules record. He had a record he was doing called You Got to Stay in the Clique, known as Politic. That was the name of the song.
Wow.
Believe me, Joseph Wooten, every time I sing this song, he falls on the ground because he thinks it's the funniest thing. Because he always looks at me once in a while and goes, Kenny and Lee, you got to stay in the clique, baby. Anyway, so they liked my bass playing, and then he recommended me for more demos there, which eventually led to me meeting Gary Malaber, who lived in the neighborhood.
Who's Gary Malaber now? Tell our listeners who that is.
Well, Gary Malaber goes all the way back to Moondance, for crying out loud, with Van Morrison. He was a Buffalo musician, New York musician. He was in a band called Raven that got signed to Columbia with 7 albums for millions of dollars really early. He came to LA, became a studio guy, played on all Steve Miller's big hits, played on most Eddie Money's big hits, played on some Peter Frampton records, some Bonnie Raitt tours and records, and the list just goes on. Springsteen, he's still recording with Springsteen. So big time studio drummer. He was in the neighborhood, and he would work for demo wage when he wasn't touring or doing big sessions. So he would come in and do these demos. So there was a guy there, a writer by the name of Gerard McMahon, and he was putting a band together. He'd already had one record with some label, and they recorded a Caribou with Gershio. And so he had a name, sort of, and so they were putting a band together. And the name Kenny Passarelli and the name Stanley Shelton came up for bass seats, but neither one of them were available. And so they offered me the band position, so that I got in this band called Gerard McMahon and Kid Lightning. And Gerard and them had grown up in Denver with Maurice White and all the Earth, Wind & Fire guys, because they were a mixed band originally in Denver. A lot of people don't know that, but they were a mixed band. So they were friends with them. So Maurice wanted to get into the new wave rock and roll thing, you know, with the thin ties and the eye mascara. He wanted to get into that, so he signed that band. And then Gary and I became writers with Gerard. We did 2 records with Gerard. We could see the writing on the wall that we were never going to be like big equity owners. So we started writing our own stuff away from the band, and that's when Steve Miller called in 81, when he was dry, looking for material, and that's when he took all 8 of our demos, which became the Abracadabra album. So that ties that all in.
What did you write on Abracadabra record?
The first song is a song called Keeps Me Wondering Why, and Gary and I wrote that together. And then the second single was called Cool Magic. I wrote that with Gary as well. And then the flip side of the single in Europe was Never Say No, that I wrote with Gary and John Massaro, our other songwriter, a friend of ours. And it was almost kind of like an Eagles kind of, I would say it was almost like country rock, but it was pretty cool, but it was still rock and roll. More like Mellencamp. It was like a Mellencamp song.
Yeah.
And so I had 3 co-written songs on Abracadabra, which sold 5 million copies, you know, and so I was able to buy my first house with the royalties from that record. And and then Diane had some money coming in on the Sgt. Pepper album. So between Sgt. Pepper and Abracadabra, we were able to buy our first house from Kevin Cronin of REO Speedwagon, because he had just moved out because he'd written all the hits for High Infidelity in there.
Oh, yeah.
And he was already living in a villa in Encino because of all the big hits that they had written there. And so we bought his house. It had an 8-track studio already built into it.
Beautiful.
So it was pretty cool.
When did Steve ask you to go on the road? It was later in the 80s, right?
Well, after we did that record, I was just a writer-producer guy. He invited me to come down because he liked my guitar and bass playing because if you recall, he transferred all of our 8-track TAC 80-8 masters to 24-track, and I was already on the record because I played basic guitar on almost all those. So he didn't replace any of those parts. He loved them. And so he just called me up one day. He says, hey, you're playing basic guitar and all this. He goes, I love your playing. Why don't you just come down to the studio and help me finish this record? And so I would just go down there and give him tips on what to do and what I was thinking. And Gary was there too. Gary got the production credit, but I was the newbie. So I just, was just there helping out, I guess.
Right.
But I was there when we recorded the Abracadabra solo and all that stuff with all the sound effects. And I helped out with that whole session and everything. And so I was just a friend, a peer songwriter that he needed, that I didn't have to impress him or anything. I was already all over the record, So when he asked me to join, it was just sort of like, hey, I'm doing pictures tomorrow for the record album, and you're all over the record. Why don't you just come out and tour with us? It was like that. I didn't have to audition or anything.
Wow. Yeah, so he was, you had no reason to try to impress him because he needed you because he was having trouble coming up with material. And that's
because he was sober. He finally stopped drinking, and he got in a divorce, and he was sober, and he just was good. His juices weren't flowing. I don't know how to explain it, but he was dry, and he needed to deliver a record by Christmas, and it was already October.
How does okay, so you've got the gig now, meaning back in the 80s.
Right.
You're still got the gig. No one keeps a gig that long, Kenny Lee.
Well, no. Come on now. You guys came on. I mean, Ricky talked about this the other night at the Vibrato. I mean, you guys came on with Ben's band. I mean, I know you weren't there, but Gordy and Malik and Ricky and Billy, they were all brought in for the Born to Be Blue album. I did not play on that album. I had nothing to do with that record. So that was something he decided to do to try to get a new flavor going. He was trying to rebrand himself. He sent me the record. I had nothing to do with it. And he asked me what I thought of it. And I told him, I don't get it. I don't know what you're doing. It doesn't sound like Steve Miller to me. Mm-hmm. I don't think your fans are going to think that. I don't think the label's going to even let you release it. And he was like, you're crazy. This is going to be the biggest record I've ever done. Click. And so I didn't hear from him for 6 years. So that was what that was all about. Because I think he wanted me to tour with him because he needed that second guitar and he loves my playing and he wanted me to be involved, but he just didn't like my critique. But guess what? Capitol refused to release the record. He had to sue them on contractual artistic control through his contract, and that was his last record with Capitol on his last 7-album deal with them, and he forced them to put that out.
I had no idea. Wow.
So I was right, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't pissed.
So because you told him the truth, he didn't want to have anything to do with you for however many years, right?
6 years, yeah.
Fast. I don't know that part of the story, so this is all news to me.
Yeah.
You and I have never spoken about that.
No.
Because we're just hanging and we're always playing music and we're buddies, but I did not know that.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't not like the record. I thought the record sounded good, and I love Ben, and I love the fact that he co-wrote, Space Cowboy with him and rearranged it, made it sound real kind of jazzy and new. Smooth jazz was just starting then, and that was a thing. And like Michael Franks and I don't know, some of the guys, Kenny Rankin. I mean, there were some vocal artists then that were kind of like smooth jazz vocalists. And I think Steve saw himself as being like that. I think he thought he'd go into the autumn of his years, singing jazz or something, And what was interesting is that when you guys went out to go tour, or not you, but I mean you came a few years later. But when Ricky and Billy and Gordy and all them went out to promote that record, the Greatest Hits CD came out on a new thing called Compact Disc. It was like a really big deal. Compact disc, It was no more tape anymore. It was digital, and this was a big deal. So all the young college people and stuff bought the compact disc, which of course we call it CD now. And his greatest hits went through the roof. And so while they were on the road playing Little Red Top and Willow Weep for Me, they were screaming for Jungle Love. And
I was on that tour, by the way.
Okay, all right.
I was
okay.
on that tour.
Well, I know that eventually you got in the band, but I don't know if were you in the band from 87?
Not 87, 88. But I don't think they toured before I was in there. I'll have to ask those guys, but I don't think there was a prior tour because I was doing my record for Atlantic in New York.
Okay.
Ben called me and said, "Can you play guitar?" And I went, "Sort of."
Okay.
And I said, "What is it?" He said, "It's the Steve Miller Band with your brothers." And I went, "I'm in."
Okay.
Man,
well, then I wasn't there, so you know the story better than I do. But the CD it came out, and that's when everybody was screaming for the rock tunes, and he had to start more.
The jazz tunes went over like a lead balloon,
right?
And he'd go into rockin' me, and they went crazy.
They go ape. So that was the thing, you know. So over a period of 6 years, he was trying to remorph the band back into a rock and roll machine, and that's eventually why he brought Norton back, of course, and brought Byron back, and then eventually asked me to come on board, I guess, because they just wanted, I don't know. I mean, whatever you guys were doing out the road, when he came to be at the NAMM show in April, whatever it was, January of 1993
or something.
92? Yeah, 1993. He just said, "I'm ready to make a change. Do you want to come back to the band?" He goes, "I'm doing one of your songs on this new record," which was the one that Leo wrote all the songs for, of course. And I had no idea that he'd recorded my song. I didn't have anything to do with it. And when I heard it, I went, because it didn't sound anything like my demo. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't put my foot in there because he'd already recorded it.
Right.
So when he asked me to come back in the band, I was really doing well with JBL at the time, selling Rivera guitar amps. In fact, Steve bought a bunch of them from me, and they were getting ready to give me dental, for crying out loud, put me on the big payroll. So I was going to be like a regular JBL, electronic engineer kind of dude. And, then he comes back into my life.
Was that a difficult decision to make, to go back on the road with him after all you've been through and all the kind of hard feelings that I didn't even know there were?
There weren't any hard feelings. There weren't any hard feelings. There just weren't any feelings at all. He didn't get angry. He just didn't call me. I mean, he told me I was wrong about my summation of the record, and that he thanked me very much for my service. And that was it. It wasn't like angry. Yeah. So when he came back, it was just sort of like, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" He goes, "Doing this new record, and I built my business back up, and blah, blah, blah." And so, that's what that was all about. And so it was, again, another tough decision, because when I had to join the band in 82, I was walking away from my studio career.
Yeah.
When I had to join my band in 93, I had to walk away from 5 years I'd put in with JBL, and where I was getting ready to have an office in Northridge, for crying out loud, and I had kids and stuff, and I was trying to be more of like a regular person.
Right.
So when he asked me at NAMM, we were eating rubber chicken sandwiches, like you do in NAMM at lunchtime. And he's going, I want you to come back in the band. And the first thing I said was, "Why?
Yeah.
Why? Why you want to do this to me now?" Mm-hmm. I mean, I've got everything. I've been in the corporate sector now. I mean, I feel good. I'm still doing music too, but I've got real job. I've got health insurance, for crying out loud, which you would never pay. He went like that. And he goes, "Well, we'll just pay you more, so you can afford your own." I went, "Oh, okay." So we kept going back and forth about like that, for about 2 or 3 weeks. And I had to turn to Diane, like I did in 82, and go, "What do you think?" And she went like, "Well, how much is he paying?" And I told her, she was like,
Yeah.
Because Diane's a musician, she knows that. She goes, "Well, maybe it's time for you to go back on the road." Mm-hmm. So that I kind of left it up to Diane at that point.
Yeah, that's a family decision because you've got kids. Like you said, you had a great job. You were getting ready to, you made a life for yourself, and they keep pulling you back in.
Exactly. It's like the mafia. It's funny, man. So that kind of goes back to your original statement you said about how everybody just thinks it's just so grand and it's just all roses, and and you get hired and it's like you're on cloud nine and the red carpet's rolling out, and there's ladies in bikinis with peacock fans, and you're in a hammock, and it's all this stuff. I mean, I've talked to people before and they actually think this stuff, and of course the after show parties is like a Roman orgy,
Yep. Not happening.
No,
they don't have no idea. Yeah. The original question I was trying to ask you, and it's a compliment, but I think you need to share how this happens. And You've had a gig for so long. How do you keep a gig like this for this amount of time? What's the secret?
One of the secrets in this particular organization that I figured out is that you don't want to get too close. You don't want to get too buddy-buddy with your employer. I think this goes across the board with a lot of businesses, not just music, but in particular with business and music. In this particular organization, and I'm just going to make this real quick because, I know this is going to go public, but Steve doesn't have any kids.
Yep.
He doesn't really have a relationship with his siblings, one of which is passed. His parents are gone. He doesn't really have a whole lot in terms of personal relationships other than just a small group of friends, which are kind of transitory, and then his band. So you could easily become a buddy with Steve really quickly. He'd love that. He'd love to hang and golf and fish and, go on a yacht trip for a month catching salmon or whatever it is that he has up his sleeve. He doesn't do that stuff nowadays, but when I met him, he was doing that stuff. And I had to realize early on that I can't be a buddy with him and I can't hang with him because if you do, you're going to be on a different dynamic level. So you have to make sure you keep your distance, keep it cordial, you keep it professional, but you don't have too much exposure. And I think that's been one of the things that's helped me. It's just to kind of, when I see him, I'm on the stage, I give him the thumbs up, we're rocking tall together, we're doing all the grimacing, we're looking at the audience, we're rocking out. Then when we come off stage, it's like, oh, great, see you tomorrow, That's it, it's just professional, and that's it.
Interesting.
I don't even invite him to a lot of things that I do, which I'm sure he's probably a little hurt by from time to time. But I think it's better. I think it's better that I'm not trying to include him in all my personal stuff and everything. I invited him to my wedding. He came. It was an interesting thing. I have him on videotape. But at that time, he had not married Kim yet, so he was kind of transitional. So he brought some interesting woman with him. And my friend Alan O'Day, who wrote Undercover Angel, Midnight Fantasy, he videotaped my whole wedding. And he's got a video of Steve stealing all the big shrimp. It's pretty funny. I've got evidence, But I mean, he had a great time. And in fact, I think my wedding really influenced him. I think he told me one time, he goes, I went to your wedding, man, and I really realized that I needed to settle down again and meet somebody that was really a good person for me and blah, blah, blah. And that's when he went after Kim again and married Kim.
How has the Miller tour changed over the last 20 years?
Tour in terms of the travel part or the performance part?
I would say just the dynamic of what it's like to be on the road. Your kids are grown, or they grew up with you being on the road. You're an empty nester now, I take it. And how is that? How does touring 20 years ago compared to touring now for you personally?
Well, I mean, it's like, Lee Strasberg in Godfather when he says, "This is the business we have chosen." It's like that kind of thing. You don't really analyze it too much. You just kind of go like, this is a great paying gig. The music is good. It's first class. It's like we never feel that we're having to sacrifice anything. It's like, why not? It's just sort of, you could just go, you get the plane ticket and you show up, and it's not like I'm getting all excited about, the adoration or where we're playing or who we're going to be playing with and who we're going to be meeting and, taking selfies with. And, I don't even think about it. In fact, I don't even look at the itinerary real close. I kind of like a surprise. So sometimes I'll go out and I don't even know where I'm going to be in a day or two. And I don't care. It's kind of fun. It's like being on a magic carpet ride and you just sort of watch it all kind of unfold. Right. And I would say that that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's kind of like, is there a fishing spot there where I'm going? I'll make sure I take my rod. That's about all I think about, And, because I know that the catering is going to be great. The hotels are going to be great. The transportation is going to be great. Everything's going to be great. Steve is a class act. He's always had great regard for his musicians. He treats them with great respect. And that's another reason why we didn't have to be too close, because I didn't have to go to him and complain or get heavy with him or call him out on his shit or, I didn't have to do any of that. I just kind of let it be what it is. It is what it is. Because I've always described Steve as someone who is generous, but non-negotiable. So it's on his terms, his generosity, and when it comes, you just be a good receiver, and that's it. But you don't go to him and you don't like, I'm thinking maybe you ought to give me a little more money, and and I need like a little better bus or something like that. I mean, I used to watch Norton do that, and I go like, because he could do that for some reason or other. He and Steve had a kind of a different relationship, but I never went down that pike. I just sort of like, whatever it is, what it's going to be, and it's fine. And Scotty, our manager, he's really great too. He's a saint. He's always protecting us, and he's sort of like a go-between between us and Steve. And he knows how to speak jokerese. There's like a language that he has to speak in a way that he approaches Steve. That if we tried to do it as a band, it would be a whole different dynamic. So he's able to work all that stuff out on our behalf, which is really great. And that's what gives us that great professional dynamic. Like I was saying, we just show up, we say hi. It's kind of like, remember the Warner Brothers cartoon when the coyote and the roadrunner would pass each other? Yeah. And they would punch the card. Or sometimes it was the sheepdog. It was the sheepdog and the coyote. Right. The sheepdog and the coyote, and they punch the tongue. Hey, you doing, Ralph? How you doing? Okay. And they pass. And then, of course, the rest of the cartoon, they're trying to kill each other. Right. And, it's a funny dynamic because it's almost that way,
You started off on guitar for the first, 25 years?
And that's a funny story, too, because if you remember, I was a bass player. I was a studio bass player when I met Steve. And
How did that happen?
When he transferred I was a bass player and a guitar player all my life. When I was in, grammar school through junior high, I had a musician friend of mine named Bruce Lano. We were in bands together. He was a songwriter, and I was a fledgling writer, but mostly just a player. I put more of my time into playing lead and copying, Hendrix and Clapton and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page and all that stuff. And he was a writer. So when he would write his songs, he would write them on guitar. So when we would do his original material in our band, he'd want to be on guitar because that's what he felt comfortable with. It was harmonic. It was something he'd get his pitch from. And I would play the bass. And when we would play the cover tunes, the Hendrix, the Cream, the blah, 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 I would play all the lead guitar stuff, and he would play bass. So we would swap back and forth all the time. And that was just natural for us. We didn't even think anything of it. And as a result of that, we both became great rhythm guitar players and great bass players. Forget the lead guitar thing. I mean, anybody can play lead guitar. But to play really good rhythm and to play really great pocket bass, and you know this, that's the stuff that gets you the work, not the lead guitar playing and all the wheedlies and stuff. So that was the thing that we both did. So when I went to LA, I went there I think I kind of went there as a guitar player because that's what I'd been doing in my bands up in Sacramento. But then when the R&B thing started hitting real heavy in the mid-'70s, all the sessions started leaning more towards really bass-orientated grooves. So that's when I really put my time into that. And then, like I said, I got in this cover Chitlin Circuit band, met James Jamerson, I met, Louis Johnson, and James Jamerson Jr. and all this. They were all bringing me into that world. And I learned thumb technique, slap, blah, blah, blah. And that's what brought me into the studio world because I could read. Louis Johnson would do the dates where they just wanted a guy to play a lot of thumb, but he couldn't read. They'd bring me in to do the sessions that had notation, but they still wanted slap and stuff, So we kind of traded a lot of sessions together. Wow. So I was a bass player in those days. So when I met Steve and I went to this album photo session that I told you about, that he called me about, I ended up showing up. And I get there, and there's this black guy there that I hadn't seen through all the sessions that we've been doing over at Capitol, and I didn't know who he was. And nobody had introduced me yet, so I just went up to him and said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Kenny Lee." And he goes, "Oh, I'm Gerald Johnson." I said, "Are you like a percussionist or something?" And he went like, "No, buddy boy, I'm the bass player." And I went like, "Really?" I went, okay. So I go over to Steve, who's getting his makeup on. He's got, the cucumbers on his eyes or whatever he's doing. And he's sitting there. And I go, Steve, he goes, yeah. I go, what am I playing in this band? He says, oh, you're going to be a guitar player.
Oh,
and at that,
man.
And I said, okay, well, why? And he goes, well, you played guitar on all of your demos, and I love your guitar playing. I want you to play guitar. I said, I got a Strat, I got a Yamaha acoustic guitar, I have a Bassman head and a wah-wah. I think I might have had a cabinet too. A Standell cabinet with two mismatched speakers. So I was in no way ready to go on the road to be a guitar player on that tour. And I explained that to him. He goes, don't worry about it. We'll get you gear. And I was like, okay. And I'd never been in a band where they did that kind of thing, So we're up in Seattle rehearsing. Sure enough, we went to a music store one day with a wheelbarrow, and we came out of there with 5 amps and 6 guitars and, Echoplex pedals and just all kinds of stuff, and it's like, he goes, yeah, these are all for you to play. And I went like, really? Okay.
Thank you.
He handed me Jimi Hendrix's left-handed 1969 Strat that he bought from Manny's that Jimmy had ordered but could never pick up because he died in 70 or whatever. He never picked it up. So Steve bought it, and he handed it to him. Just string it right-handed, just use this. It was the guitar that Jimi Hendrix ordered for himself. It was a left-hand guitar because Jimmy always played right-hand guitars and flipped it over. Right. I guess he wanted to see if he could play a left-hand guitar, so he ordered a couple. And Steve bought them from Manny because they were on order and they were in the back room. And he showed me the receipt one day, and it actually had Jimi Hendrix's name on the receipt. It was wild. But that's the kind of stuff I was just blown away. I'm just going wow. So I'm on this tour, right? The first thing we know, we're playing in, what are we playing? We played Tahoe, which was great because all my family and people showed up. And then we jumped to, where did we go? We played Saratoga, and then we played the Summerfest in Milwaukee. Mm-hmm. And then we played a little place in Jersey, and it was an old wooden joint. I can't even remember the name of it. But we did only about 4 U.S. states, and then bam, we jumped to Europe. Because if you remember, the Abracadabra came out without a single because they wanted Steve to pay payola to a guy named Charlie Miner.
I know that name.
Who was a criminal that, actually was the guy that got Diane the gig for Lucy and this guy. So thanks, Charlie. We appreciate that. But he held not only Steve's record back, but he held my Pieces record back because none of us had $50,000 cash to hand him just to get into rotation, Mm-hmm. So Steve wouldn't do it. He says, I never had to do that before on this Abracadabra album. So the record labels went, okay. So they put out the album without a single, and that's why my song Keeps Me Wondering got some airplay at first, because it was the first song on the record. DJs would just put the album on, and they go boop, and they'd play that, and I was hearing that around town going, wow, but it didn't have any push behind it, so it just kind of petered out.
Right.
But fortunately, at that time, Greg Fishback, who was his manager lawyer, negotiated a deal where Capitol only had the U.S. and Canada distribution, and Polygram Mercury in Amsterdam had the rest of the world. So what happened was the album got over there, and of course they didn't care about payola. They're all about art for art's sake. Mm-hmm. And they heard Abracadabra, which didn't sound like anything Steve had ever done before, and it was kind of like a pop, ska reggae kind of feel, and it just went crazy in Europe. Yes, nobody knew. We were actually up in Seattle rehearsing for this bleak U.S. tour, and we get a telegram one day, from Western Union talking about, everybody get their visas in order because we're getting ready to go to Europe because we're number one in Ireland or something like that. It was just insane. And so that's how it all went down. We completely canceled our U.S. tour, went to Europe. We're number one all over there except for England. We were number 2 because Eye of the Tiger was released at that time from Rocky III, who incidentally I had played bass on the soundtrack. I had played on the cues for Bill Conti. So it was kind of funny.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, but the song was, of course, Survivor. And that song kept us from going number 1 in England. It's pretty funny.
No
kidding. But we came back to the States, big stars because we had been number 1 over in Europe. And that's when they finally started promoting it in the U.S. And, of course, Capitol took all the credit. We're taking the pictures with us. And I'm going, get away from me. You guys didn't do shit. They were all trying to take those industry pictures with us and give us the gold records and stuff. And we were like, get away from us, because they just, jive. It was all about, graft and corruption.
Of course. So, but let me get back to the original question. Was you started on guitar and then you forged a friendship with my brother that, of course, is strong as it ever has been, although he's not in the band anymore. You guys spent an incredible amount of time. You guys share so many of the same interest and things like that. He gets hurt. He falls off a ladder, and there's gigs happening, and I'm going.
And you got the call.
I got the call, and I'm supposed to be on the road with Olita Adams. I'm like,
right, which was a great gig for you.
It was a great gig for me. I knew the book for the Steve Miller book because it hadn't changed, I don't think.
If I recall, we were doing 2 nights at the Thornton School of Music at USC. We were going to do 2 nights, and there was a benefit for the school. And if I recall, you could do 1 night, but you couldn't do the other night.
I don't remember, to be honest.
That's what I recall. And when that went down, that's when Scotty went to Steve. He goes, well, we can have Paul for one night, but we got to get somebody else for the other night, you know. And Steve says, I don't want to do that. I just want the same guy for both nights, you know.
Yeah.
And that's when Scotty goes, well, didn't Kenny play bass on like your first 3 albums from '93? Because I played on 3 albums. I played not only on Abracadabra, but I played on, Shangri-La, on the, I played on Italian X-Rays, and I played on Living in the 20th Century. I played bass on all 3 of those albums.
I didn't know that either.
Not all the tracks, but many of the tracks, So he had forgotten. It was so long ago,
Right.
And because this was like 2009 or 10.
Right,
I think it was 2010. He'd forgotten. He goes, oh, yeah, Kenny's a bass player. And that's when he said, well, just have Kenny play the bass and I'll just do the guitar. So that's how it all started. And we were all waiting for Billy to come back, because he was, he was healing and he couldn't stand. I think he broke his ankle in 4 places.
He did, yeah.
So he couldn't really even stand on stage. He would have to sat in a chair or something.
Right.
And Steve didn't want that. So he says, well, just have Kenny play until he comes back. So that's what was going on. Right. And that's how that went down. And so I started playing bass, and the powers of B were just sort of like, you ain't leaving that chair.
Right.
And I went, what are you talking about? We're waiting for Billy to come back. And they were going, nope, you're going to stay there. One of the reasons, and I'm not going to go into great detail, but I was playing some lead guitar in the show at that time.
Right.
And I was getting really good press. So there you go.
We'll let the rest to our imagination.
So I got fired as a guitar player the same day that I got asked to be the bass player.
Cool way to put it.
Yeah, I was fired and hired the same day.
Wow. Just because I want to be good with you at the time, and we're probably up against the 60 minutes of what the podcast is. Tell me what you do when you're not on the road.
Well, what I'm doing now, Paul, is I'm kind of following my friend Tim Pierce's model. He's a great studio guitar player that I actually helped get a guitar when he came into town in '80, helped him get a Schecter guitar. I just interviewed him. You can go to my YouTube channel, which is Kenny Lee Lewis on YouTube. There's a playlist there that's called Fret Friends. And it's just sort of like what you're doing here. I interview celebrity guitar players. We might play a little bit, but we just talk about stuff. Or I might not interview, and I might just do a lesson, or I might do a little bit of a master class.
Right.
A little bit of a master class. And so what happened is that it developed, kept getting going, and then so I went ahead and got a website together, like Tim does, of his master class called fretfriends.com, FRETFRENZ.com. Okay. And that is a subscription lesson website, which of course everybody started doing during COVID because we were all out of work. And that's what I was doing, in addition to live streams, which are also on that same YouTube channel with my band right here in this garage during COVID. And so I'm trying to monetize that into something where it will operate on an auto sort of a robot level to where, subscriptions will come in. I've yet to got to that point yet where it's even paying for itself. So right. I'm working on that this week. I'm going to try to change the format of it and, make it so it's a little cheaper to run, because right now I'm on Kajabi, which is really expensive. So I'm going to change that while I'm building that. But also, I'm doing, sessions for other people. I produce other acts. I have a studio. Of course, are we still recording? It looks like we're still recording. Yeah, we got to wait for them. So I got a Pro Tools session here, and, I produce people here. I do live gigs around here. I have about 5 bands. I write novels. I have books on Amazon, one of which is called Skeleton Dolls, Children of the Tower, which is done very well. I self-published it, and I'm trying to get an agent right now for the sequel, so I'm in the process of doing that. But I also have, my band Barflies, BARFLYZ, music.com. People can go there and see what that's all about. Also on Facebook. I have another band called Friends, which is where I got the Fret Friends from, FRENZ.music.com. That's kind of like a tribute, dual lead guitar harmony, like Steely Dan meets the Allman Brothers with Jimi Hendrix and Jeff Beck and all that stuff. I do that. I also have a band called Supernova, which is a Latin band. I'm actually got a gig next week doing that. I did one last week with them. It's fun. Saxophone player from War is in that with me, and then I have the band that I'm doing with your nephews up there in Montana, which I just changed the name of. I call it Hucklebear now, which is the band that Billy plays in, and we play up in the Northwest and up in the Montana area. With that, we just did 3 gigs up there. And in fact, Will is already booking some more gigs with them over Thanksgiving. I can't make that, unfortunately, because I'm going to be here with my daughter, Kendra. But they're going to continue that legacy going forward when Billy and I can't even do it. So we got jobs for your nephews now, which is kind of nice.
I love it. Keep it going, man. Keep it going.
So that's the kind of stuff that I've been doing. And, of course, Diane performs with me from time to time. Our Barflies band is really unique. But unfortunately, COVID killed a couple of the venues we were playing in at the time. We haven't been able to find a place that fits that band quite yet. There's a place called Libretto that I'm hoping up in Paso Robles that will be the one that we will start resurrecting Barflies again. But if you want to see that, like I said, go to BARFLYZmusic.com. You can see that with my wife. We do all kinds of interesting covers. It's kind of a jazz pop meets mashups. And it's for our older age group of the wine enthusiasts around here. And it's been working out really well. So that's a fun band. Great. But, other than that, just doing gardening and cooking and, enjoying.
And fly fishing.
And fly fishing. A lot of fishing.
Boy.
Yeah. Just got my waders, got my vest. I just learned how to nymph fly fish, and I was just fishing in the Missouri and the Blackfoot, and I was catching the monster trout. It was fun, man. I mean, I had never got to that part of my fishing thing. I always just use lures, catch them, take a picture of them, usually let them go, but I'll eat them sometimes. Now I think I'm just going to be letting them all go and just kind of leave them in the net and be really nice to them and everything. So in my older years, I'm becoming less of a...
You're a softy, man.
Yeah, I'm not a Neanderthal anymore. I'm a little more of an artist. I'm an artist.
That's right. Kenny, thank you so much for spending an hour with us.
Yeah.
It's been fascinating. And I learned so much just about our passings in the night in the Steve Miller
Band. And I wanted to brag about you a little, too. I mean, the guitar parts you played on this new record here, by the way, I'll do a little commercial here. This is the record, folks. Go out and buy it. It's great. Paul played some guitar on this and played all the drums on it. He played on the gig the other night, but I mean, the guitar parts were beautiful. And so I really, really love your guitar playing. I'm a big fan of yours, let alone your bass playing. And your drumming is ridiculous. So I wanted to just give a little commercial for Paul Peterson.
I love you, man. And you are a Peterson. We've adopted you. We think the world of you. And thanks for taking the time out. Go check out all of Kenny's websites that you heard him mention. And Kenny, say hi to Diane. I love you, brother.
Yeah, she's at some gig right now, checking out some band down the street. She wanted me to go. I said, I can't. I got to be with Paul.
I love it. Well, that's it for us. Episode 51 in the books. I can't believe we're that far along already. You guys, will see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Music on the Run was hosted by yours truly, St. Paul Peterson. Edited and produced by my buddy, Davide Raso. Video editing by Tanner Montague. And a very special thanks to the people who financially support this podcast. And remember to take the money and run.